Yes. Yes.
Oh. Al, you want daven? We called it for 6:30, right? That's the right time? 6:25? I apologize. My bad.
May that be your biggest Avera of the year, Rabbi.
It's close. Shabbat Mincha. We need to get you a tallis. Thanks, Joey. Shabbat Shalom, everyone. Those who are joining on Zoom. We're on page 214 in the Lev Shalem, 226 in the Slim Shalom, 558 in the Sim Shalom.
Ashrei Shvevetecha Rialucha Sela Zila David. Ziladna Yedabepi, Vivaecha Basashin Kochalelam Paed, Vanachna Yam, Et Avyadalam, Hallelujah, Uvalitzion Goel. ואתה קדוש השבתי לו ישראל, וכבוד זה בעמי, קדוש 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 ונצור לארץ כבודו. ותישאני רוח ושמע אחרי קורש גדול, ולמי במקומו. אדוני ימלוך לעולם ועד. תיתנם ליעקב חסד ואברהם, אשר נשבעת ותקוני לכתם. ויבדחו בך ידי שמך, כי לא עזבת ראשך אדוני. אדוני חפץ למען צדקו, יגדיל תורה ויאדיר. יתגדל ויתקדש שמי רבה, ועמד בקביעותי, והמליך מלכותי, וחיי חול ובימי חול. וחיי דחו בישראל, בגלה בזמן קריב, אמרו אמן. יהי שמך ברוך, ולמה מעמיה. יתברך וישתבח ויתפאר ויתמה ויתנשא, ויתהדר וידלה וידלה שמי קדושה בריחו. ואלה מגובי חטא ושירתה, תשפטה ונחמתה רמון בעלמה, ואמרו אמן. ואני תפילתי לך אדוני את רצון, אלוהים ברוך חסדך, הנני באמת אישך. ויהי בנצרות, ויאמר משה, ומר אדוני יפוץ אויביך, וינוס משונאיך מפניך. תורה, ואדוני מירושלים, ברוך נתן עלינו ישראל, בקדושתו. גדלו אדוני ציון ומה שמו יחדיו. Which way do I face?
Parshat Kitetse, found in the Chumash. 1112 in Eitz Chaim Chumash. If you're following along from a different Tanakh, you want Dvarim, Deuteronomy chapter 21, verse 10. Israel ben
Abraham,
Abraham the Levi, the Arishna Baruch Shatan Torah
Baruch et Adonai Barak. Baruch Adonai Barak Le'elam Vahed. Baruch Ata Adonai Eloheinu Melech Haolam Asher Bachar Banu Mikol Hamim V'natan Lanu et Torato. Baruch Ata Adonai Noten HaTorah. Baruch Ata Adonai Eloheinu Melech Haolam Asher Natan Lanu Torah Emet V'Chayei Olam Nata B'Tochenu. Baruch Ata Adonai Noten HaTorah.
Yeah, the Zoom mic is not working.
Page 1113, verse 15.
That's better.
Amen. Tichena li shetei nashim achad achua ve'achad snua ve'ataloho banim ve'achavad hasnuaha v'haya haben abachor l'siyah v'haya bayom hani lo et banav et asher tichyevoho lo yuchal l'kadet et L'bakir et ben ha'chova al pnei bak ben hasnuah ha'bachor ki et ha'bachor ben hasnuah yakir latet lo peace v'nayim b'kol ha'she'im stimat se lo ki hu reshit oh no lo mishpat akabara.
Page 1113, verse 18.
touch it here. Amen. Kikiyelish ben sarer moreh einenu shamel b'chol chaviv b'chol imoho yasriu oto v'lo yishma lechem v'tafsu bo aviv imoho v'hatziu oto el asinei yiro el sha'ar mekomoho Yamaru el ziknei ro v'anenu zeh moreh Sorer more einenu shomer b'kolenu zolev v'sovein v'gamu kol anshei ro v'avanim v'ameid u'baratal hara v'kerbecha v'kol Yisroel yishma'u v'yira'u.
Once again, anyone in person or on Zoom who has a yort site needs an El Male recited? Okay, so we continue. Continue in the Lev Shalem, page 221.
Hallelujah, Shem Adonai, Kis Kashava Levado.
Malach Hashamayim
V'yarken
v'yarken
Le'amo, V'yarken Le'amo. Yitzchayim Himakzim Bavdumrecha Meushad Rohecha Dochenu Amchunu V'Techa Shalom Hashivenu Neach V'Noshuva Chadesh Yamenu Kekedem Yikada. Yitgada v'gadash me'aba v'almad yivak yuder v'chvachute b'chayechonu v'yamechonu chedocho b'Yisrael v'agla v'zman karivimu amen yehesh b'barach l'lam l'me'amaya yitbarach v'ishtabach v'yitbar v'yitma v'yinaseh v'yidada v'yidala v'yidala shmer kudesha b'rechu le'elam go b'chata v'shirata tushpata v'nechmata deman b'amavimu amen.
The Amidah said in a silent whisper, beginning 223 in the Lev Shalem. So David, please continue to pace. Repetition begins 223. You may say from Kedusha 225.
Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu Eloi Avotenu Eloi Abraham Eloi Yitzhak Eloi Yaakov Eloi Sarah Eloi Rivka Eloi Rachel Eloi Leah Hayel HaGadol HaGibor HaNorah Eloyon Gomer Chasadim Tomim V'Konei Yaakov V'Zocher Chasdei Avot Umevi Goel Livnei B'neihem L'man Shmo B'Ava Melech Ozer V'Kid Moshiach Magen Baruch atah Adonai Magen Avraham V'Kid Sarah Atah Gibor Le'olam Adonai Melech V'Tav V'Loshia Morid Atal L'Chalkel Chaim V'Chesed Mechayim V'Tim B'Rachamim Rabim Samech Noflim V'Fer Cholim V'Matir Asurim V'Keim Adol Yishanei Avar V'Yiramach Haba Gevurot U'Midom Melach Melech Me'Minuchim Atzmiach Yeshua V'Ne'eman Adonai Chayov Meitim Baruch atah Adonai Mechayei HaMeitim Nekare shechim habalam geshen shuak dishim barobish memarom gagatu vayad neviach avakar zevel mahar.
Kadosh, 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 Adonai, Tzvon Chalak HaKodesh, Lemar Kemeru.
Kadosh, 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 Anatzah, Baruch ha'aretz vodo, L'matam Baruch Yameru.
Baruch Adonai, Mikol
Baruch Kavod Adonai Mimgamo, Divrei Kol Shecha Katsuv Lemor.
Yibon Adonai, Tzion Ador, Vador Aliyah.
Yimeloch Adonai le'olam, Elohai Tzion, L'dor vador, Hallelujah. L'dor vador Gigod lecha, L'netzach nesim Kedushat Chanakti, Shimcha Eloheinu, Mibinu Emush le'olam va'ed, Ki Omelech Gadol v'kadosh Ata Baruch Ata Adonai, Ha'el HaKadosh. אתה אחד בשמך אחד, מכם וחסר וגוי אחד בארץ, תפארת גדולה, ועתיד ישועה, יום מנוחה, קדושה לעמך נתת, אברהם יגר, יצחק ירנן, יעקב ובניו ינוחו בו, מנוחת אהבה ונדבה, מנוחת אמת ואמונה, מנוחת שלום ושלווה והשקט בבטח, מנוחה שלמה שאתה רוצה בה, יכירו בניך וידעו כי מדך היא מנוחתם, ועל מנוחתם יקדישו את שמך. אלוהינו ואלוהי אבותינו, הצב מנוחתנו, קדשנו במצוותיך, ותן חלקנו בתורתך, שבענו מטובך ושמחנו בישועתך, ותאר ליבנו לעבדך באמת, להנחילנו אדוני אלוהינו בעבר רצון שבת קודשך, וינוחו בה ישראל מקדשי שמך, ברוך אתה אדוני מקדש השבת. ויצר אדוני אלוהינו ועמך עשו את תפילתם, ואשר עלי בביתך, ותפילתם בבתך ברצון תהי רצון תמיד עבודת ישראל עמך, ותחזינה עינינו, ושובך לציון ברחמים, ברוך אתה אדוני, המחזיר שכינתו לציון, מודים אנחנו לך. הטוב כאילו חל רחמך, ומרחם כאילו תם חסדך, מעולם קיווינו לך. ועל כולם יתברך ונועם שמך מלכנו, תמיד לעולם ועד. וכל ענודך סלע, ויעלו שמך באמת, האל שותנו רצותנו סלע. ברוך אתה אדוני, הטוב שמך לחנן להודות. שלום רב על ישראל עמך וכל יושבי תבל, תשים לעולם, כי אתה הוא מלך, אדון לכל השלום. טוב בעיניך, לברך לעמך ישראל בכל עת ובכל שעה בשלומך. ברוך אתה אדוני, המברך את עמו ישראל בשלום. צדקתך צדק לעולם, ותורתך אמת, וצדקתך אלוהים, עד מרום אשר עשית גדולות, אלוהים מי כמוך. צדקתך כהראל, משפטך תהום רבה, אדם ובהמה תושיע אדוני. יתגדל ויגדש מרבה, ועמד דבר קירותי ומליך מלכותי בחייכון ובימיכון וחייכו בישראל, בגלה בזמן קריב עמו, אמן. יש ברבה ברח לעולם ומרמיה, יתברך וישתבח ויתפרע ויתמר ויתנצר ויתהדר ויתעלה ויתעלה שמית הקדושה, ולעיל אמין כל ברכתה ושורתה תשפטה ונחמתה דמען בעלמה ועמו, אמן. תתגבר צורך ומלכון לכל ישראל, כאדם ושמיה ועמו, אמן. יהי שלום רבים שמיה וחיים עלינו ועל כל ישראל ועמו, אמן. עושה שלום במרומיו, הוא יעשה שלום עלינו ועל כל ישראל ועמו, אמן. עלינו לשבח לאדון הכל. ונאמר והיה אדוני למלך על כל הארץ ביום ההוא יד אדוני אחד ושמו אחד.
Kadisha Tom Warner's Kaddish.
יתגדל ויתקדש שמי רבה ועלמא דברה קירותי וימליך מלכותי בחייכון ובימיכון ובחיי דכל בית ישראל בעגלה ובזמן קריב ואמרו אמן. יהי שמי רבה מברך לעולם אלוהי יומיה. יתברך וישתבח ויתפאר ויתרומם ויתנשא ויתהדר ויתעלה ויתהלל שמי דקודשה בריחו לעילה מן כל ברכתה ושירתה תושבחתה ונחמתה דמירן בעלמה ואמרו אמן. יהי שלמה רבה מן שמיה וחיים עלינו ועל כל ישראל ואמרו אמן. עושה שלום במרומיו הוא יעשה שלום עלינו ועל כל ישראל ואמרו אמן.
Shkoch to Alan for davening, to Barry for laning. Those who are here in person, we invite you to take some food for Sudash Lishit. Those here on Zoom will be starting the learning in about 7 minutes. The text sheet went out in the Shabbat bulletin, so if you'd like, you can get some food as well. And you can eat while we're eating over here. We'll start in about 7 minutes.
Oh, good to see you. Yeah, hi. Not sure. Okay. Yeah, you know. I think you and I got not that I want to take you to relax. I've not had a chance for you to say hello to talk to you since Wednesday when I've wanted to do so. So it's good to see you.
You too.
Thank you for giving me I didn't see the blind spots or anything. So, but are you walking back?
From tonight,
Yeah.
I'm biking back. Because I have an event tonight right after Havdalah. Everything good?
It is. Okay. It's okay. But I will share one very Yaakov wants to organize his services, and he has this very good.
Good. This is
Ben Ron.
Yeah.
Ron Singh, yeah. It's in Las Vegas.
Yeah.
He's very, very good.
In Las Vegas. He moved.
He lives in Las Vegas.
I know that.
He lives in Las Vegas. It's a real blessing to have him do it. It's so I was talking to a patrol member I hadn't seen in a while. I like to walk to the we were just chatting about business.
Is Siako back at campus? Okay. That's very lovely. Name Stella. Thanks, Al. We'll catch up other time.
All right, I'm going to jump in because this is a 2-hour shiur that is we're going to do in 22 minutes. This interesting article. There are plenty of extras here. This is good. Yeah, it's fine. Okay, so there was a fascinating article in this week's Jewish Journal by Rabbi Chaim Steinmetz, who is, I think he's a rabbi at one of the Orthodox schools in New York. I forgot which one, maybe KJ. And he poses the punchy rhetorical question, is all of rabbinic law a violation of the Torah? Which is a legitimate question, particularly given verses from this morning's Parsha, where God instructs through Moshe that you should not change the words that I'm giving you, yamin or smol, left or right, meaning you should observe them exactly as they are, which means that the Karaite revolution in the 8th to 9th century CE may have been the most pristine attempt to restore living life according to the Torah as possible, right? And as possible, the Karaites look at rabbinic Judaism, all of us, as heretics, because we took the 5 books of Moses, we our ancestors, we said, that's a nice start. Some of the words mean exactly what they look like they mean, and some of the words mean the opposite of what they look like they mean, right? And some of these words we feel very, very obligated by, and some of these words, we're gonna say that we're obligated by them, but if you watch what we do, what we don't do, it's gonna be quite clear that we're not at all obligated to them, at least the way they are written in the Torah, right? Obviously, we are inheritors of the anti-Karaite tradition. We are inheritors, everything we do is rabbinic Judaism, right? To quote one of my teachers from JTS, Rabbi Joel Roth, when it comes to determining halakha, I don't give a damn what it says in the Torah. That's what he said with a twinkle in his eye, right? He's one of the most observant, conservative rabbis in halachas. What he's saying is when it comes to determining Jewish law, we don't quote Leviticus. The rabbis use Leviticus as a way of determining normative practice, and we are inheritors of that tradition. Sometimes it's possible to see in real time the rabbis reckoning on a meta level with their own obligation to transform Torah into livable law. Because if you go to shul regularly, as opposed to just kind of see the highlights, there's plenty of material in Torah law that you would have a hard time living by your ethics, by your conscience, by your sense of morality. Just in this past week's Parsha, where we had the laws of going to war, some of the laws going to war that when you're, warring against certain peoples, particularly ones that are close to the land of Israel, you're supposed to show no mercy whatsoever. You're supposed to kill man, woman, and child. So they learn the lesson, they don't bother you again. If you're going to war with people who are farther away, you can be a little bit merciful, only kill all the males. Right? So there are clearly aspects of our revered, beloved tradition, the text that we kiss when it goes around, that we have some, and our ancestors had some issues with. What I want to do today is go through some of the most classic material on the rabbis reckoning with, working through, struggling with maybe some of the most challenging verses in the Torah. And again, we should probably do this much more slowly, but I wanted you to just get a taste of it. And the question I want you to be asking yourself as you're going through is, what are the rabbis doing when we get to the text in the Mishnah? And is there more than one way of understanding what they're doing? Right? Because it might be an obvious thing what they're doing, but it might be a less obvious thing that they're doing as well. What section are we talking about? The section that Barry just read about the Ben Sorer Umoreh, the son who is rebellious and wayward. Here are the verses, 4 verses from the beginning of Parshat Ki Tetzei. Ki yela ish, if a man has, Ben, a son, Sorer Umoreh, wayward and reckless and rebellious. Einenu shomea b'kol aviv v'kol imo, does not listen to the voice of his mother or his father. I switched that around. His mother or his father or his mother. Okay, good question. All right, so hold on to that question, because the vav can be an and or an or. V'yasruoto, they wag their fingers at him. They try to bring him in line. V'lo yishma elehem, he does not listen to them. Okay, so in one verse, you're seeing a story that maybe you know quite well if you've ever tried to raise a child. V'tafsu bo avivimo. Already by verse 2 of this section, we are in action mode. They shall take him, his mother and his father, v'hotziu oto, bring him out, el ziknei iro, to the elders of his city, v'el shar makamo, to the gate of where they are living, v'yamru, and they say publicly, el ziknei iro, to those elders, b'nei nuzeh, this son, sorer umoreh, he is wayward and he is rebellious. Eineno shomea b'kolenu, he does not listen to our voices. Zolel, he is a drunkard, v'soveh, and a glutton, or vice versa. What's that? Good question, right? So in verse 20, they're giving testimony to aspects of his waywardness that were not present in verse 18. But we're only 3 verses into the section, so it's still developing the picture. Uragamuhu chol anshe iro bavanim. All of the men of his town stone him with stones, vameit, and he dies. This is capital punishment. Uviarta hara mikirbecha. This seems to be a cause and effect here, and by doing so, you will root out the evil in your midst. V'chol Yisrael, and after living in a society where this is what they do to their wayward son, I'm interpolating here, all of Israel yishma'u, they will learn to listen, ve'yura'u, and have awe. You better believe it. Okay, right? Listen, we could spend an hour discussing our reaction to these verses. We could spend an hour asking the kinds of questions that Barry and Alan asked, which is like, why is this letter here and why is this added here? Is there any questions to what this verse is asking us to do? Right? If you're living in a realm where Holy Writ is transmitted to you from the divine, right? Leave the corners of your field for the poor. Don't work on Shabbat. Don't boil a kid in its mother's milk. Stone your child who does not listen to you. There's no winking in this verse. There's no irony. There certainly doesn't seem to be any like self-aware irony. Right? There's no sense when this verse is introduced saying, hey, we're going to lay in these verses to the same trap as the other verses, but we all know we don't really mean it. When you're reading through Parshat Varim, there's no indication that we should be reading these verses with any less earnestness, any less an expectation that we're supposed to act on it than the other verses. Okay? And that seems clear. It's hard to find a biblical scholar who reads that any differently, except that the sages, I would say, blessedly, read it very, 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 very differently. Okay? And so the 8th chapter of Mishnah Sanhedrin, I'm only giving you 4 of the 8 or 9 halachot here, is one of the most interesting, and some people consider it controversial, and some people consider it the most inspiring sections of rabbinic literature, right? Why it's interesting for obvious reasons. It's controversial because you see the rabbis really doing surgery on biblical texts with what authority? Or inspiring, you see the rabbi saying, listen, obviously we want to be Torah observant Jews, but obviously we're not committing infanticide. So how are we going to get from A to B? Okay, so we're going to just go through some of these Mishnayot. There's a lot more material in this chapter than this one, than the ones I'm going to give to you. Okay. And Mishnah Sanhedrin, Sanhedrin is 10 chapters dealing with jurisprudence and issues related to judges and courts and witnesses. And all of a sudden, because the Mishnah is an associative text and it jumps around, you get to the 8th chapter of Sanhedrin, and with no warning, the last Mishnah of chapter 7 does not suggest that this is what's coming next. All of a sudden, we see the rabbis, or a record of the rabbis dealing with the Ben Sorer Moreh. Okay. Ben Sorer Umoreh. So first, the phrase, this wayward and rebellious child, me'ematai, from when? And this is not a question of like what time of day, but at what point? What are the boundaries that define when a child could get this moniker and such be subject to the death penalty? Mi sheyavi shtei sa'arot, v'ad sheyakiv zaken. From the moment when he brings 2 hairs until he rounds off his beard. Hatachton v'lo ha'alyon. The rabbis add, this is lower hair, not upper hair. Ella, rather, shedibru chachamim b'lashon nikiya. But our sages spoke with euphemistic language. So when the rabbis here talk about 2 hairs and a beard, they're not talking about facial hair, okay? They're talking about pubic hair, but they don't want to speak about that. They want to speak about speaking about that, but not speak about that. So when you talk about bringing 2 hairs, it's an indication of puberty. And so what's been done here? So how long do we think that is? Right? That's a very narrow period of time, from the time that 2 hairs are visible to when more hair is visible. And how do the rabbis read that out of the verses? And the question here, are they reading this organically, or is this ex post facto? They're trying to find a hook in the verse for this narrowing. Ish ben, because the Torah says it's when you have a son. Ben v'lo bat. So first of all, it says son, so it doesn't mean daughter. Sometimes we get upset when the Torah mentions just a male and excludes a female. Sometimes it helps. Ben v'lo ish. It also doesn't say a man. It's a child. So it's not a man. But hakatan patur. If you were really a child, he's exempt. A katan is not obligated to mitzvot. Shalo balichlal mitzvot is not obligated. So we've got to find the category where it's a male, it's not an adult, it's not a child. Oh, for those 4 days, right? Or for those 2 weeks in between the onset of puberty and a sense when it's actually much more visible. Barry, you're going to say something? Barry, I want to pass the microphone around because there are people on Zoom. It's okay.
I got the sense that the hair is in 2 different locations. There's 2 pubic hairs until the time that the lower part of the face is long enough that he can round it. So that's not a couple of days. I think it's about like 5 years.
Except that the Mishnah is pretty clear that when it talks about the lower beard, it means the pubic hair, because otherwise they wouldn't have said, and after all, the rabbi spoke in euphemistic language, because there'd be no reason to refer to this as the lower beard euphemistically. It just is what it is.
They're rounding the beard.
What's that?
Rounding the beard. So it's,
yeah, it's accepted interpretation of the Mishnah that we're talking about lower hairs, but I suppose it's possible to read it differently. However we read it, it's extremely narrow, okay? So the first thing we've done is narrow it down in terms of time, right? You might be rebellious, but if you only have brought 1 hair, you're not subject to the penalty. And if you're already hirsute, you're not subject to the penalty. Okay, Mishnah 2. Me'ematai chayav. Now we have another, from when is this person liable? Mi sheyochal tartemar basar, until you eat an enormous amount of meat. I'm thinking of when I used to eat meat, and there was a restaurant on Emek Faim in Jerusalem called Norm's Burger. And if you could eat their big kahuna burger, which was like, I don't know, 2 kilo hamburger, then you could get your name on the wall, and then your present was another one, right? So I got my name on the wall, but I declined the other one. But I think tartemar of basar is more than that. So some enormous amount of meat, And he also drinks a half log. It's a lot of wine, and not just any wine, Italian wine, which is very strong and very expensive. Okay. Where do the rabbis see that in the verse? The verses say nothing about that, but that's what the rabbis are determining. Rabbi Yossi Omer, maneh basar v'lo yayin. Even more than that, right? Not forget this chatzi log. He might be someone you want to discipline if before that, but it's not until he drinks an entire log of yayin and has a maneh of basar that he's obligated. Achal b'chavurat mitzvah. Let's say he ate this amount and he was in that 1 week period where he's liable, but he was doing it as part of like a mitzvah group, like they were out celebrating some holiday. This is now going to be a string of ifs. Or achal be'ibor hachodesh. He was at a party to celebrate the fact that there's a new Adar. How come we don't have a party when a second Adar is coming? But remember back then, they didn't have hebcal.com. They couldn't look into the future. They were determining in real time, is this a month when we're intercalating the year? It's a great word, ibor hachodesh, ibor from the word meaning pregnant, and ubar is a fetus, because it was a pregnant year because the year had a bump. So if he was eating it in that situation, or achal maser sheni b'Yerushalayim, there is a second tithe that in certain years in the Shemitah year cycle, you were supposed to, a second tenth off of the tenth that had been taken off, and it was supposed to be taken to Jerusalem and eaten there with celebration, or if it was too much for you to schlep your oranges or your potatoes or whatever to Jerusalem, you would convert that produce into coins, take the coins with you, you would go to Jerusalem, you eat it there. Some people believe that the reason why this was set up is so that Jerusalem would actually have an active economy, and also that people would have more of a reason to be going and making a pilgrimage there. So if this kid aged 12 in a day and 12 in 2 weeks ate that much of wine and that much meat, but he was doing it because he was in Jerusalem celebrating the second tithe, or achal nevelot v'trefot, or if he was eating treif, right? He had this amount, but it was the two different kinds of treif, right? The animals that was found to have a blemish once killed, or an animal that died of natural causes out in the field, or shkatzim or masim, or the meat that he was eating were creepy crawlies or snakes, yuck, or achal tevel, he ate produce that had not been tithed, umaser rishon shelo nitla trumato, or he ate from the first tithe from which its own tithe had not been taken, umaser sheni behekdesh shelo niftu, or two other categories of food that is supposed to be eaten in a certain sanctified way. Achal davar shehu mitzvah, davar shehu avera, if he was eating it to fulfill a particular mitzvah, or if he was eating it to violate a particular mitzvah. Achal kol ma'achal v'lo achal basar. Let's say all this amount of food in the right situations, but it wasn't flesh. Shatal chol mashke v'lo shatal yayin, or he drank that amount of intoxicant in that 1 week during his life that he was obligated, and it wasn't any of these other situations. But it wasn't wine. Eino naseh ben sorer mareh. He is not considered a ben sorer mareh, such that he's subject to the punishment. Ad sheyochal basar ve'yishteh yayin, until the point that he eats meat and drinks wine. In these circumstances, shet ne'amar, they bring a proof text. I say proof text here because normally a proof text proves something. Sometimes, all the time, the rabbis bring quotations from verses, and when you read the verse, like, oh, that's why they're saying that, because that's a good proof text. Their proof text here are the two words that Barry asked about, because the verse says in the third of the 5 verses that we read that our son is Zolel and Sove. Now, it's barely a proof text, because we don't even know what those words mean. Those are near hapax legamina in the Torah, in that the words appear almost only here and nowhere else. So we only know them from context. It's not like you read the word sove, like, oh, I know what sove means. Sove means someone who drinks this much Italian wine in this situation. No. So it's a proof text, but an extremely convenient proof text that is maybe they convinced themselves and were happy that they wrote these laws there, but it's not really an obvious proof text that makes you say, oh, of course, that's why they're saying that. Yes, Irv. Let's give Irv the mic. Keep the switch on.
Complete different take. It's really when I heard it, it was the broken windows theory. You got to stop
bad behavior before it starts. So they're making an example of an extreme case because the real impact is the impact on the community of having kids kind of go do what they want to do, there.
Yeah.
So that's
Oh.
kind of why I'm looking at it. More, it's really to impact the rest of the community, making an extreme example, saying we're going to really, really bear down on one person rather than let him get away with it so everyone else could then follow and get away with it.
Right, good. There's an active tension here. The easiest thing is to look at the verses Dvarim and say, oh, this is just crazy. This is fundamentalism. This is Wahhabism. This is Saudi Arabia. And our morals are more refined than that, and we don't have to pay attention to these verses, right? It would also be easy, it would be horrific, but it would be easy to say, this is what the verses tell me to do. I suppose that's what I should do, right? The verses tell me to sacrifice my son, or the verse tells me to not sacrifice my son, but to circumcise my son. I haven't interpreted that out of reality. I do it. I don't know why. It feels weird when I'm doing it, but I do it. So both of those would be easy ways of reading the verses. More challenging is what you're bringing up, Herb, is that the verses were about a real societal phenomenon. About a societal phenomenon, as we'll see in a second, has been real throughout all of history and is still real on some level, and that is how does a family and a society raise mensches, put boundaries in so that the values are transmitted, don't terrorize a society by punishments and incarcerations that push against our sense of morality, but don't permit anything and everything. Because when you permit anything and everything, society doesn't look so good, and cities don't look so good. Deb. Just keep it on.
All right. So, two things.
Deb.
One is
Deb.
there's yeah, I know I feel really weird.
I know, but they can't hear you unless it's up
Okay.
there.
Okay. There's a lot of things that the community is supposed to stone people for, right? In the Torah, right? Like, I don't know all of them, but right? This isn't a unique punishment per se. So I think we have an extra sensitivity, obviously, towards teenage. Well, I mean, the thing with the puberty, I don't think it really matters where, if it's facial hair or pubic hair, but it's like puberty, onset of puberty. It goes for some years, and the hormones are raging, and kids are crazy then. So I see it as like a warning to parents. And honestly, it is shocking, the punishment, but I see it more as like a warning. And the gluttonous, the gluttonous drinking thing is like, okay, this is what you really want to be careful your kids don't do.
Yeah.
Is like drink a lot and, whatever. Like, that's just kind of the way I'm interpreting it.
Absolutely. And
So,
and the question that I want us to be thinking about as we're reading through this, and we're going to read one more Mishnah, we don't have time to read two more, is what's in the mind of the rabbis who are authoring these Mishnayot? The authorship of the Torah will always be shrouded in beautiful mystery, right? We just don't know, right? So our faith tells us that it comes from God to Moshe at Mount Sinai. And scholarship tells us it's much more complicated than that. And that will be unresolvable until the end of time. The Mishnah is not a mystery. There were rabbis sitting in rooms in Tzipori, in the Galil, and in Yavna near Tel Aviv, and they were writing these laws down, and they were real human beings, and we know their names, and what were they thinking? And what did they think they were doing? And did they think they were involved in something chutzpahdik, righteously chutzpahdik, or did they think they were just kind of following the rules of hermeneutics, of biblical interpretation, and this is what came out? Let's read one more, and then I'll ask you to answer that question. What do you think they were doing? The next Mishnah, further limiting. Ganav mishel aviv v'yachal bershut aviv. Let's say he stole something that his father owned, and he ate on his father's property. Or mishel acherim v'yachal bershut acherim. Or he stole other people's property, and he ate it on their property. Or mishel acharim v'yachal bershut aviv. Or he stole other people's stuff and ate it in his father's property. In all those situations, Eino naseven sorer mareh. He's not considered a rebellious child such that he's liable to the punishment. Ad sheyignov mishel aviv, until the thing that he steals belonged to his father. V'yochal bershut acharim. But he eats it in other people's property. Why? Rabbi Yossi bar Rabbi Yehuda Omer, Ad sheyignog Mishel Aviv u'Mishel Imo. Not a why. Rabbi Yossi bar Rabbi Yehuda adds on an even greater limitation. He doesn't become obligated to this terrible punishment until he steals that which belonged both to his mother and to his father and then eats it in the property of others. Okay. The chapter goes on, right? So we've got a law that seemed pretty broad. A rebellious child who is eating and drinking his way through adolescence, stone him, right? It sounds almost Monty Python-ish. Stone him, right? Already in 3 Mishnaic verses, or Mishnaic texts, the range that someone would have to fall into in order to be liable to this punishment is extremely narrow to the point of impossible, right? What do you think the rabbis thought they were doing? What was their mindset? Hannah?
They were trying to make it impossible to kill your son. They didn't want that.
Say it one more time in the microphone.
Oh, they didn't want the sons to die. They didn't want that.
Okay.
And so they looked carefully at the text and then figured out ways to get around this terrible decree in Deuteronomy. Yeah.
So one view is, and we like this view, we are liberated by this view. We modern progressive Jewish movements are inspired. We are given validation by this view. The rabbis looked at verses of the Torah that they could not countenance. They said to the Torah, we were listening carefully, Torah, when you outlawed child sacrifice. We listened carefully when you told us that we're supposed to value all life. So we think we know you better than you know you. And you're giving us these verses and we're saying, yeah, like we can't Sharpie the verses out. We can't say, instead of there being 613 mitzvot in the Torah, there's 612, but we can use all of our interpretive skill to make sure that this situation will never be put into practice. And now either that the Karaites looked back at this chapter in Mishnah and said, what were you doing? This is heresy. This is blasphemy. This is saying you know the Torah better than the Torah knows the Torah. And we say, thank goodness there was a thrust in rabbinic literature to look at aspects of the text that are problematic, say we can do something with this. And we can do something without crossing it out, right? And you probably each can think of a verse right now that when you read it in the Torah, you cringe. And because you're a member of a traditional conservative synagogue, we don't not read verses from the Torah. We don't not read hard verses in the Torah, whether it has to do with the, issues with children or other things, because we're descendants of a tradition that reckoned with, dealt with, did not throw out, but found a way to narrow the negative impact of some of this material. Warren?
Okay, so, the way, to me, the interesting question is not so much, I mean, I understand obviously the rabbis never wanted to have this law enforced. To me, the interesting question is why is it there in the Torah in the first place?
Yes.
And I think it's, and it's suggested, I think, in the last writings that you have here, that it is a lesson, and maybe more metaphorical, of the seriousness of children who are wayward, and the effect that that has on the community and the future, and that it is so serious that metaphorically the child should be stoned.
Yeah.
Okay, so maybe it doesn't mean that the child should literally be stoned, but maybe that the child should literally be saved, so to speak. You know, that there should be salvation for that child,
Yeah.
and redemption.
Right.
And that's what this is about.
Right. So maybe it either means that the child shouldn't literally be stoned, or it means that the child should literally be stoned. And then the rabbi's interpretation of it, such that it never actually came into practice, was an act of righteous chutzpah. And scholars to this day debate this, right? A few months ago, you may have heard the news, the greatest living Talmudist alive, Rabbi David Weiss of Livni, who I speak about all the time from the pulpit, who was a professor at JTS and then at Columbia, and a mind who knew the Talmud on a level that we can't even fathom. He had a famous article, I forgot in what scholarly collection in the 1980s, basically pushing against the way you and I are all instinctively reading these verses. And I bring this with reverence, even though I want to disagree with him, although it's chutzpah for me to say that I could disagree with someone with such a sage, but it's hard for me to imagine that what he said was happening in these chapters actually were, although he knew about 1 billion times more about rabbinic literature than I'll ever know. He could not countenance the rabbis not countenancing verses from the Torah. Meaning he couldn't imagine a rabbi sitting, creating the Mishnah, looking at the Torah, looking askance at the Torah and saying, gotta figure out a way to make these verses not applicable. He couldn't live a life imagining that the rabbis whom he revered were actually critiquing the Torah by eliminating its application. What he believed was going on, and maybe he's right, is that the rabbis created and inherited a list of methodological principles by which verses of the Torah are interpreted, and it's kind of like an algorithm, and you apply those principles to verses, and what comes out is waiting 3 hours between meat and milk. And what comes out is this is the size of a sukkah. And what comes out is, this is the way the Megillah should be read. And what comes out is, oh, I know, it looks like we're supposed to stone him, and we are supposed to stone him, but only these very, 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 very narrow circumstances. Far be it from us, Halivni would say, that we're intentionally trying to do it. Had we applied the methodology and it came out that we're supposed to stone our children in all these circumstances, we would have done it because we're God and Torah-fearing people. But that's not what the rules suggest. I have an admiration for someone with that amount of faith towards the tradition, but I struggle with imagining that the rabbis are doing anything other than righteously challenging their revered text without cutting some of it and throwing it in the trash. Tom?
My question is, given that argument that you just made, those are all, but it's always based on proof texts, and as you said, these are not. It doesn't make sense. They don't seem to be following the way they usually do things here. They seem to be just sort of making it up, and the proof text, as you said, they give it's not a proof text.
Right. I don't remember the specific arguments read by Halivni marshals to make his argument. I read this article a long time ago, and it was a core article for us to study at JTS because it was something to reckon with how we imagine our power, our authority as interpreters of the tradition. Can we also look at verses from Leviticus and say, yeah, like it didn't mean that, but it actually meant a very, 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 very narrow version of that. And that's what we're going to maintain as a prohibition. And so Rabbi Halivni is generally someone who would have said, no, rabbis do not really have that power to consciously change the law. All they have the power to do is to interpret the tradition according to its rules. But I don't remember which rules he said they were individually following when he made this argument. But it was a famous argument that he made, and kind of an argument in defense of a what's the accusation that is sometimes levied at certain members of the Supreme Court, either an activist court versus a originalist, right? Halivni would say, I'm an originalist when it comes to the Torah, and I believe that the rabbis are originalists, and I don't want to see Rabbi Akiva as an activist. Because if Rabbi Akiva was an activist, then I can arrogate to myself as an inheritor of Rabbi Akiva that I can also be an activist, so I can say, well, in September 2022, this law is all of a sudden not sitting well with me. Well, I can just, Rubik's Cube it out of. He didn't want that to be a present tense in religious law. Sheva? I don't know if you all met Sheva. Sheva is one of our new rabbinic residents this year. She is a fifth-year student at HUC. You can applaud. And will be with us all year studying and learning, and I hope you'll learn a lot from her. Sheva.
Thank you. So what's not sitting well with me here, I understand that they're narrowing the scope of what wayward and defiant would be, but why are they not narrowing the scope of urgamuhu kol anshe Yerova avanim vamet? And are there other examples where stoning in the square and could we say, oh, we only stone him with pebbles and met is a spiritual death? Are there other ways in which that could be narrowed in scope? Because that's also like a much more common thing that we encounter in Torah than Ben Sora or Moreh.
Yeah, fascinating. You're right. The rabbis are applying their scissors to the definition of the category, not the definition of the stoning. I don't remember if at the end of the chapter, I have to look back, if they spend any time talking about if the person fit into that category, is there some way that we're going to play with the verses of the stoning that limits it? I don't think that they are. I don't know. Maybe the rabbis believed that they could preserve the notion of the punishment and sleep well at night knowing that they have made it impossible to carry out. I don't know. Alan?
Two things. First, with respect to the death penalty itself, the rabbis go out of their way to put all sorts of restrictions for death
Right.
penalties, for murder, for
Correct.
everything else. Like, they have to have 2 witnesses be warned.
Right, and a Sanhedrin that killed one person in 70 years was considered a bloody Sanhedrin.
Yeah, or it could be every 70 years, and if it was like Rabbi Akiva and one other, they would never put anyone to death.
Right.
Right. And it's just so, it's not just here that this is going on. And the rabbis themselves knew that some of the rules that they were announcing were tenuous. They said that, and we had this discussion, that all of the rules of kashrut are like a mountain being supported by one human hair. And if you think about all the laws about milk and meat.
Upper hair.
Upper hair, that's right. Upper hair. All the laws about milk and meat are based on the one line, Al tevashel gedi b'chalev imo, don't cook a kid in its mother's milk. There's an old joke about that, may I? Yeah.
Please.
This is so, Moses, is going before God, and God says, Al tevashel gedi b'chalev imo. And Moses says, oh, you mean that we have to have separate dishes for milk and meat? God says, Al tevashel gedi b'chalev imo. And Moses says, oh, you mean we have to wait 6 hours or 3 hours, whatever we have to have after we have meat before we have milk? God says, Al tevashel gedi b'chalev imo. And Moses says, oh, you mean for Passover we have to have separate dishes for milk and meat? And God says, all right, have it your way.
Just so you know, Alan's starting the Temple Beth Am chapter in favor of chicken parmesan. That will be.
Yes,
that will be
I'm
coming
a
soon.
Rashi fan.
Switch to page 4. I know it's not numbered, but the back of the second page. This is a little piece of Gemara, of rabbinic interpretation on the Mishnah. So the Mishnah, the text that we were reading before, are somewhere between 50 and 200 CE, and now the Gemara, representing material from centuries after that, except that sometimes in the Gemara, we're quoting other material from the age of the Mishnah that just wasn't included in the Mishnah. And this is also in Tractate Sanhedrin. Keman Azla Hadatanya. Who do we think the following text agrees with? This is a common way of Talmudic argument. We find like this text hanging out there. We want to make sure that we can attribute or associate that text with one of the authors of the positions that we've been dealing with. Ben sorer umoret lo haya v'lo atid liot. There is a piece of Mishnaic material. The fact that it says Datanya, it means it comes from the era of the Mishnah, but it wasn't included in the Mishnah. Some rabbis said that rebellious child, halachically speaking, never was lo haya v'lo atid liot, and never will be. By the way, I don't know if this is coincidence or not. There is a Yiddish expression that I remember learning when I took Yiddish at Columbia that basically applies this never was and never will be, not to a rebellious child, but to Jesus. It was a common, thing to throw out in Ashkenazi Judaism, that when someone would mention Jesus, they would say in Yiddish, I forgot how to say it, never was and never will be, right? Like it's all a myth, right? But here, the rabbis are applying that to the category of the rebellious child. It never happened. The Lama Nichtav. Well, if that's the case, if this was never put into practice, why was it even written? Drosh v'kabel schar. It's there for a reason, not to build your society around this rule, but so you should study it. And by studying it, you'll have some illumination, which I hope you're all experiencing today, and you'll receive reward. That line, Drosh v'kabel schar, was famously a significant part of the tshuva that Rabbi Gordon Tucker wrote when the conservative movement was approaching again the status of gays and lesbians in the Jewish community, and he basically applied that concept to those verses in Leviticus. Well, if the verses in Leviticus were not meant to absolutely prohibit sexual contact and romantic relations between people of the same gender, then why are they there? Rabbi Gordon Tucker said, "Drosh v'kabel schar." They're there for us to reckon with and study and get and be rewarded for having toiled in the material, but not for us to live them out, directly speaking. And he would say the rabbis gave us a good template for that. Come on, who is this like? Who could be the author of this? It could be Rabbi Yehuda. Ibayat Ema, if you want to say Rabbi Shimon Hayidatanya. It could be like the following text from Rabbi Shimon. Amar Rabbi Shimon. Shimon said, "V'chi mipnei shachal zet tartemar basar v'shata chatzi log yayin ha'italki avi v'imo motziino tzol salko." Basically, Rabbi Shimon said directly what we're inferring from the Mishnaic verses. Is it really possible that because he ate some meat and drank some wine, that his parents should stone him? He's actually asking the question we're asking. Could that possibly be what God wants? Ela lo hayav v'lo hatilio. It actually was never meant to be and never happened. V'lama nichtav, and why was it written? Drosh v'kabel schar. Right? So maybe this anonymous position is really Rabbi Shimon, who had incredulity when he came to these verses. He's sitting in shul, Parshat Ki Teitze, and he says, "What? We're not supposed to be acting this out. We're supposed to studying it and receive some wisdom from it." And what's the wisdom? We'll get that in a second. But then there's one fascinating line that is not upheld in any other place in the Talmud. Amar Rabbi Yonatan, ani ra'itiv, yashavti al kivro. Rabbi Yonatan says, "You think it never happened? I was witness to it once. And I sat on the grave of the one who had been killed." How to assess the historicity of this one line by Rabbi Yonatan, I don't know. Is he basically saying back to Rabbi Shimon, don't be so cavalier about getting rid of Torah laws? Is he saying, in my village in the Galil, they did it, and I sat on his grave? And is he saying he sat in his grave sort of triumphantly, like yeah, it was supposed to be done and did it? Or is he saying with a sense of heaviness that I was witness to it, and I sat on the grave of this child who was killed for this reason? Irv?
Well, you say wayward, it could be that a kid killed somebody, right?
Yeah.
It could be like, not just, he was drunk and didn't listen to his parents.
Or could become someone who would,
Or,
right? Like Minority
or
Report.
went into a school and shot up 19 kids.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like that never would happen these days.
Right. Marshall?
Well, Rabbi, you said that the words Zolel v'Soveh are problematic. I honestly don't understand what Sorer Moreh means.
Correct. Yeah.
What is Sorer? Like Sur means to turn.
Right.
Moreh is like instruction.
Right.
Well, I want to clarify it a little bit more. Okay, he doesn't listen to the voice of his father or his mother. Oh, you still don't get me? Okay, now finally, he's Sorer Moreh. He doesn't listen to his mother and father. Finally, he's also Zolel v'Soveh.
Yeah.
There are 3 levels here.
Right. And the 4 adjectival verbs that describe this person that you would think you'd want to understand with specificity if you're going to commit capital punishment are words that are very hard to make sense of, even if you know biblical Hebrew well. Tom, was your hand up?
So maybe the point is that they weren't really legislating it so that it would absolutely never happen, that there was a person who had exactly that amount of hair and who drank that amount of Italian wine, like that it existed in the world.
Right.
That's not what they were doing. They weren't saying the Torah isn't valid. They were saying it is, it's just almost never happened, but one time it did.
Right. So you could read Rabbi Yonatan as kind of a defense of the rabbinic material, lest you think that the rabbis were truly jettisoning the law. They were narrowing it, but I can give you proof that those verses in the Torah still have applicability because I was witness to it. Now, last little text, and then we're going to finish off. So the commentary of the Maharsha, Rabbi Shmuel Idols, who has a running commentary on the Agadic, the narrative, and the halachic material in the Talmud. So he's living 1,500 years after the Mishnah. And this is going to go back to something that Irv was saying before. So it's been a millennium and a half since the rabbis basically darshaned these verses out of existence. In our times, we pay no attention to gluttonous and defiant sons. and everybody covers up the sins of his children. Even when they might be liable to flogging or to capital punishment under the law, they are not even reprimanded. Many such children are leading purposeless lives and learn nothing. And we know that Jerusalem was destroyed because children loafed around and did not study. What I find fascinating about the commentary of the Maharsha, I don't think he's saying we should be executing our children. I think he is saying, be careful with how careless you're willing to be about ancient verses that struck a terrible chord in our heart when it came to the application of the law, but was dealing with a problem in society that we're still dealing with. And we're still dealing with it 250 years after this, and I don't score us an A on this. And I'm not reprimanding any individual person, including myself, but I certainly don't score society an A in how to figure out how to keep children away from not living lives of menschlichkeit and not becoming so far off the grid that they wreak havoc in society. It's still happening. It's happening probably even worse. What would happen if the Constitution, right, had a provision for when a child's behavior gets so far out, right, that they're no longer can live among society? There are lawyers and sages on all sides of this in terms of the horrific notion of adolescent incarceration, and certainly someone whose brain is still developing, who commits a terrible crime at age 15 and might be in prison for life. There's parts of our conscience that bristles of that. And there's parts of us that recognize that if there are not serious consequences in place, right, evil is going to find its way to manifest itself. So we have not solved, because we never will be able to, what those verses originally meant. We have not solved, because we've never been able to, what the rabbis were actually doing when they came to those verses. And we have not solved how to fix the societal problem that those verses were trying to fix. But hopefully we've studied, and from the heavenly abode we'll receive reward. Shabbat shalom. We're going to go to Kaddish Rabbanan. Benching, thank you. You always remind me. Will you lead benching? 47. Can we give Joey the microphone?
Shir Hamalot B'Shuv Adonai Et Shivat Zion Haynu Kecholamim Az Yemale Tzachok Pinu Ulshonenu Rina Az Yomeru Vagoim Higdil Adonai Lasoti Mele Higdil Adonai Lasoti Manu Haynu Semechim Shuv Adonai Et Shavitenu Ka'afikim ba'negev hazorim bedima berina yiktoru halachelechu vacho no say meshech hazara bo yavo verina no say alumotav Tehilat Adonai Yedaber Pi Vivarech Kol Basar Shim Kol Shulam Vad Va'anachnu Nevarech Yah Me'ata Ve'ad Olam Hallelujah Hodul Adonai Ki Tov Ki Le'olam Chasto Mi Amalel Gevurot Adonai Yashmiya Kol Tehilato Chavi Ryan Varech.
Yishem Adonai Barachme Tavi Adolam.
Yishem Adonai Barachme Tavi Adolam. Birshut Chavi Ryan Varech Alhinu Shechal Numi Shelo. Baruch Alhinu Shechal Numi Shelo. B'Tuvo Chayinu. Baruch Baruch Shemo. Baruch Atah Adonai. Eloheinu Melech Haolam. Hazan Et Haolam. Kulo B'Tuvo. Bechein Bechesed Uvrachamim. Hu notain lechem lechol batar ki le'olam chasdo u'tuvo hagadol tamid l'chasar lanu ve'aychsar lanu ma'azon le'olam va'ed ba'avur shemo hagadol ki welzanum farnes la'kol u'meitiv la'kol u'meichin ma'azon l'chol beriotav asher bara baruch atah Adonai Hazan et HaKol Nadel Chadamel.
Vishta Rabbanan, and then we'll go into Mariv. On the left Shalem, it's on page 38. Yikadal v'yitkadash shemei Rabbah, v'yalmad yivrach yirutei v'yamlich malchutei, v'chayechon v'yomechon chayei l'chol beit Yisrael, v'galav v'zman kariv v'yimru amen, yehei shemei Rabbah v'barach le'olam v'yamei maya, yitbarach v'yishtabach v'yitpa'ar v'yitramam v'yitnaseh, yithadar v'yitalev v'yithalal, shemei l'kudusha b'ribu. Leila min kol berachata v'shirata, v'shvachata v'nechamata, damiran v'alma v'yimru amen. Al Yisrael v'al Rabbanan v'al Tamidehon v'al kol Tamidehon v'al kol man askin b'araita di v'atra hadain v'di b'chol atar v'atar yehei lahon ulchon shlam araba china v'chista v'rachamin chayin arichin zonari v'cha Panamin Kodam Avahon Vishmaya Vimru Amen. Yehei Shlam Araba Min Shemaya Chaim Tovim Aleinu V'al Kol Yisrael Vimru Amen. Oseh Shalom Rumav Uvrachamav Yaseh Shalom Aleinu V'al Kol Yisrael Vimru Amen. You rise for Mariv in the Lev Shalem 264. If you're from home in the Slim Shalom 281 or the Sim Shalom 200, I believe.
Rachum yechaper avon v'lo yashtit v'hir b'al hashiv apav v'lo yer kol chamato Adonai Hoshea HaMelech Ya'anenu v'yom korenu Baruchu et Adonai Hambarach Baruch Adonai Hambarach le'olam va'ed. Mavir yom maybe Laila Mabdil ben yom Laila Adonai Tzvaot Shemo Al Chai v'Kayam Tamid Yimloch Leinu Le'olam Va'ed Baruch Ata Adonai Ha'ma'ariv Aravim. V'ahatcha tasim mimenu le'olamim Baruch Ata Adonai Ohev Amo Yisrael. Shema Yisrael Adonai Eloheinu Adonai Echad. Adonai Elohechem Emet. Umalkuto beratzon kiblu aleihem Moshe uMiriam u'bnei Yisrael lechanu shira v'simcha rabba v'yamru chulaham. Kamocha b'elim Adonai mikamocha nedar b'kodesh narati lo tosef elhem. Malchut haro v'necha b'kayam lifnei Moshe ze'eli anu v'yamru. Adonai yimloch le'olam va'ed. ונאמר כי יפעל אדוני את יעקב וגאלו מיד חזק ממנו ברוך אתה אדוני גאל ישראל. ושמור צאתנו ובואנו לחיים ולשלום מעתה ועד עולם ברוך אתה אדוני שומר עמו ישראל לעם. ברוך אדוני לעולם אמן ואמן. כי המלכות שלך היא עולמי עד תמלך בכבוד כי אין לנו מלך אלא אתה ברוך אתה אדוני המלך בכבודו תמיד ימלוך עלינו לעולם ועד ועל כל מעשיו. יקרא ויקרא שמי רבה למד יבקר וימליך מלכותי בחייכנו וימיכנו חייך בית ישראל בגלה בזמן קריב ואמרו אמן. יהי שמי רבה מברך לעולם ומעמיה יתברך וישתבח ויתפאר ויתרומם ונעשה ויתהדר ויתעלה ויתעלה שמי לקודשה בריחו לעילם מן כל ברכתה ושירתה ותשבחתה ונחמתה דמירם ויאמרה ואמרו אמן.
you're still davening, please continue at your own pace. Chatzi Kaddish 279.
Yikra vikra shmei rabba, Yamadi vaki rujei v'amlich malkutei b'chayechanu b'mechanu b'chayidech kol beit Yisrael b'agala b'zman karid v'meru. Amen. Shmei rabba mevrach le'elam omei amaya. Yitbarak v'yishtabach v'yitbar v'yitramam v'naseh v'yitadar v'yitale v'yitala shmei kudsha b'richu le'elam min kol birchata v'shirata tush b'chata v'nechamata damidram v'yama v'meru. Amen.
We are seated for V'yanoam, middle of 279.
Ganeu imo anochi v'tzara al say v'achad dehu orech yamim azvihu v'yarehu v'shuati orech yamim azvihu v'shuati
216, second paragraph.
Yata kadosh shefti hila Yisrael v'karazel zev yamar kadosh 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 tonight Tisa eini ruach ve'eshma acharai kol rash gadol v'baruch Adonai mimkomo Adonai imlach le'elam v'ed. Yitakavacha yodei shemeka kilo azavta dorshaka Adonai chavetz l'mantika yagdil Torah v'yadihi.
Shalem 280.
Kedavi kedash me rabba v'amadi b'aki v'tei v'amlich makutei v'chayechanu v'yamachanu v'chayidech chavetz Yisrael v'agala b'zman karid v'meru. Amen. Eish me rabba merach le'elam amaya. Yiparak v'yishtabach v'yitbar v'yitramam v'naseh v'yitadar v'yitale v'yitala shemei kudsha b'richu le'elam min kol birchata v'shirata tush b'chata v'nechmata tamidram v'yama v'meru. Amen. Ekabel tzalaton v'otan d'chol Yisrael kadam Abohon divishmaya v'imru. Amen. Yehesh lama rabba min shemaya v'chaim aleinu v'chol Yisrael v'meru. Amen. V'aseh shalom b'mamav hu yaseh shalom aleinu v'chol Yisrael v'meru. Amen.
Aleinu 281.
Aleinu l'shabeach l'Adonai kol. Katuv b'toratecha Adonai imloch le'olam va'ed v'ne'emar b'haya Adonai melech l'kol haaretz b'yom hahu yeh Adonai echad u'shemo echad.
We turn back to 59 in the Lev Shalem for Psalm 27 for the high holiday season. 80 and 40 in the other Sidurim. Thank you, Joey.
David Adonai ori bishi mi ira. Lule hemanti lirot betuv Adonai be'eretz chayim kaveh el Adonai chazak v'imet libecha v'kaveh el Adonai.
Kadisha Tomornish Kaddish 282 or elsewhere.
Yitkadal v'yitkadash shemei rabba. Yalma divrach kirutei v'yamlich malkutei. Chayechon v'yamechon chayei d'chol beit Yisrael. Agala v'zman kariv v'imru.
Amen. Yehi Shemei Rabba Mevorach Le'olam Le'omei Maya.
Yitbarach v'yishtabach v'yitba'ar v'yitramam v'yitnaseh Vita Dar, Vita Le, Vita Lal, Shemedi Kucha,
Brichu.
Leila, Mimko, Bechata, Beshirata, Tush Bechata, Benechemata, Damiran, Bealma, Mru,
Amen.
Yehe, Shlama, Rabba, Min Shemaya, Echayim, Aleinu, Ve'alko Yisrael, Bimru,
Amen.
Says Shalom, Bimrama, Uya says Shalom, Aleinu, Ve'alko Yisrael, Bimru,
Amen. Shakoach Tatam. You can come take some grape juice if you like, and come as close as you feel comfortable coming. Hine el Yeshuati, Eftach velo Efchad, Ki yaziv ezimrad yad, Adonai vayehi li l'Yeshua, Ushaftem mayim besason, Mimayne HaYeshua, Adonai HaYeshua, Alamcha birchatecha sela, Adonai tzvaot imanu, miskav lanu, Elohei Yaakov sela, Adonai tzvaot, Ashrei Adam botei bach, Adonai Yoshia, Hamelech Yaneinu Be'yom Koreinu La Yehudim Hayta Ora Besimcha Besason B'yekar Kein Tiyeh Lanu Kos Yeshuot Esa Uv'shem Adonai Ekra Yain Adonai Adonai Before the blessings, I forgot to announce when more people in the room. Next Shabbat afternoon, Mincha will be significantly earlier than usual because we have a Shabbat afternoon bar mitzvah, Zion Gerlich. So your reward for coming earlier than you normally would is a really nice Sudashli sheet that the Gerlichs are sponsoring. But I think if today was 6:25, I think it might be 5:45 next week. But check the bulletin because we're not having two mincha services. It's one mincha service with Zion's bar mitzvah, and it's earlier because they need longer for his drash and for all that stuff. So I wanted to make sure I announced that. Baruch atah mechalam borei pri agafen. Baruch atah mechalam borei minei besamim. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu mechalam borei miorei ha'esh. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu mechalam avdil ben kodesh ben el-choshech ben Yisrael amim ben yom ha'shvi l'sheish yemei ha'maseh. Baruch atah Adonai ha'mavdil ben kodesh l'chol. Mavdil ben kodesh lecho, chatoteinu imcho. Zareinu bechaspeinu yarbe kacho, ubeka kochavim balayla. Zareinu bechaspeinu yarbe kacho, ubeka kochavim balayla. Eliyahu Hanavi, Eliyahu Atishbi, Eliyahu Hanavi, Eliyahu Agi. Eliyahu Hanavi, Eliyahu Atishbi, Eliyahu Hanavi, Eliyahu Agiladi. B'meheira yavo eleinu, Mashiach ben David. B'meheira yavo eleinu, Mashiach ben David. Shabbat Tov to Gary and Marlise, Shabbat Tov to all of you. And see you soon. Tomorrow evening, Daily Minyan goes from 7 to 6:30 in the evening. Daily Minyan Sunday and Monday morning are both 8 because Monday is a federal holiday. Shabbat Tov, everybody. And someone's playing piano, which is nice.